Okay, Larissa, I think it's a leap of faith, but I think the technology is probably operating now. But before we actually get the thing underway, we've just got to, engage in a bit of innocuous banter while it goes up on your page as well. So how are you going?
Look, I'm all right. I'm pretty tired. I was in Townsville last night and today, and it's pretty hot up there. So I reckon I got a bit of sunstroke, but no, I'm living the dream, buddy. How about you?
All right. Yes. Yeah. Busy times. Yeah. Obviously getting right into the thick of things now, but
yeah, it's not long to go.
That's right. That's right. We are just keeping up for the time being, and well, no, that's not true. The campaign's going gangbusters.
Yeah, you're smashing it. Yeah, absolutely smashing it. Everybody's mum loves you. This is awesome.
That's my motif. Mums love me.
I have to tease you about that every time. I'm sorry. I know it's going to get old real quick.
Okay. Well, leap of faith. I'm just going to assume that we've probably chewed the fat for long enough to get this streaming on your Facebook page as well now.
So great. Hi, everybody.
We're underway. Look, I'm going to begin this event, this myth-busting Q&A session, by first of all welcoming everyone, thanking you for joining us. But more importantly, I want to acknowledge that we are here on stolen country. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of this country. I'm actually out of Maywa tonight while my mum looks after the baby, but I'm still here in the land of the Yagara and Turrbal country, the Yugarapul nations around here. So I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and I want to explicitly recognise how much hard work we have to do as individuals and as a society to make sure that we continue to progress towards a really meaningful reconciliation through a process of truth-telling and continue the work that has begun here in Queensland and across the country towards recognition of sovereignty and formation of treaties with all our First Nations people.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, this event is what is the point of the event really? I suppose, as I understand it, and correct me, tell me what you reckon, Larissa, but I suppose we're looking to, I guess, just flesh out some of these vexed questions or supposedly vexed questions around renewables and the transition to renewables and about coal and climate and baseload power and all that stuff that kind of gets jumbled up in a bit of a mess sometimes. And we do, particularly given the tone of the media here in Australia, we see an extraordinary amount of misinformation about the potential renewables transition here in Australia and what it means for industry. So I guess we want to kind of get some of those issues out on the table, have a chat about them, because it's important for us, in our daily conversations with the people we know to bust these myths. But also, we're right in the thick of an election campaign, and we've got volunteers out all over the city, all over the state, having conversations with folks about these very issues. So it seemed like an apt time to have a bit of a chat about it and see what we can do to get some useful information on the table.
Sounds like a plan. For anyone that's not in Queensland that might be watching on my page, this is our fabulous member for Maywa. He's our lone Green in the Queensland Parliament. Michael Berkman is his name. He's a dear friend of mine and he's just brilliant at his job. We would like him to keep that job. We've got an election here in 5.5 weeks. So even if you're not in Queensland, you can still help with his campaign. Please sign up to volunteer. We need people hitting the phones. We need all sorts of different activities that you can do remotely. And if you're in lockdown, you can still help by phoning folk. Hopefully that might lift your spirits as well as the people who answer the call from you. So yeah, please pitch in and help this wonderful man. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can talk to your drunk uncle at Christmas about renewables and have some great one-liners to come back at him or any other person that you might find coming out with stuff that is nonsense, but you might just not have the right little factoid that you need to correct them and to reveal to them that basically renewables are awesome, creates jobs, fixes climate, all good. So we're going to do that tonight. Michael's going to run us through the Queensland policy on transitioning to renewables, and so he'll do that for a bit. And then I'm going to quiz him on some of the top myths about renewable energy, and he's going to give us his view on how we should respond to those myths and debunk them. And then I'll do a little wrap of the federal energy policy, and then we've got some time for questions. So please send them in. We've got some that have come in already, which we've got track of here, which is great. But please, we love your audience participation. So yeah, we'll make sure we've got enough time for questions, and we're going to try and wrap up in an hour, so 7:30 sign off. So with that said, Berko, do you want to take us through the Queensland Greens plan for energy?
I would love to. Thank you. I think the drunk uncle positioning is definitely the way to view this event. That's what it's all about. And I'm so bad at doing any kind of introduction for the actual people on these calls. So thank you for actually reminding me of that. And thank you so much. Everyone knows our fabulous Senator for Queensland, Larissa Waters, who also a great friend of mine, has been a mentor and someone whose career I've been like almost literally stalking one job at a time.
You can't say that, buddy.
No, okay, no. I've like literally almost done the same job as Larissa, about 4 or 5 years behind for most of my adult life. But anyway, that's by the by. Look, it's always exciting at this time in the election cycle for us to get serious about laying out our plans for how we're going to get to 100% renewables in the time that we need to, because these plans are not pie in the sky. Let's just start with that. We've had all sorts of authoritative bodies like the Australian AEMO, the energy market operator, have been really clear in recent years that there is no technological barrier to 100% renewables, but it's in fact a lack of political will that prevents us from getting there. So I guess that the 100% renewables target is really just the bare bones of what we have to do to address the looming climate crisis that we all know so much about. And there's a whole other drunk uncle conversation about how to deal with climate change myths, but that's for another day, I suppose. But the platform that we've laid out here in Queensland is to pitch for 100% renewable energy by 2030, which we know is achievable. And interestingly enough, I think it was the last sitting day in Parliament, we saw New Zealand Labor of all governments announced that they were actually going to institute a formal policy of 100% renewables by 2030. So this isn't...
Maybe Australian Labor should follow suit.
Imagine that.
Great idea.
Imagine targets that align with the science, hey?
Imagine 2030 targets at all.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
Sorry.
Okay. 100% renewable energy by 2030, and we are gunning for publicly owned renewable energy as well, because we've got to be clear about the fact that electricity privatisation, it costs us more. It effectively funnels whatever gains might be made through the renewables transition into private corporations. So in order to do that, we need to expand on what the state government has already done really significantly and establish Energy Queensland, which already exists, but expand its remit so that it becomes a genuinely democratic and a much broader public authority to deal with this full transition for all of the retail and the network and generation expansion that we need to make. And by doing this as well, we know that we can create stacks of jobs. Our plan would create an average of 23,000 jobs a year by building this publicly owned renewable energy. It's a process whereby I would invest $25 billion through Energy Queensland to build 20,000 megawatts of new renewable generation capacity. And that includes wind and solar. And it also looks at the important storage capacity that we need. And we'll get to that, I'm sure, at some point soon. And the additional distribution network. We need plenty more transmission around Queensland to ensure that we can generate in those parts of the state that are best suited to it and get it to those parts of the state that need it. So in addition to that, that's the big scale statewide stuff, but there's also plenty of scope for community, for community level renewables to be rolled out. So energy co-ops and the like. So we're supposed to establish a $2 billion fund that would help get that up and running, and also focus a bit on, put a big whack of funds behind household battery storage.
Yeah.
because these are technologies that are coming into their own, but they do just need a little bit of help at the moment to get them distributed a bit more widely. And look, one of the, I'll finish with this bit. The last essential missing piece of the puzzle is a reasonable feed-in tariff for the generation. We've been lacking that for so long. It's been, you know, we started off with the really massive feed-in tariff that the state government put in place. That's been stripped back to effectively nothing. There's got to be a sensible middle ground. So, yeah, we should be at least getting a fair price for what we're generating as rooftop solar generators. Now, I won't break it all down in terms of where those jobs will be generated, but we've got a really detailed plan online. I'm going to keep pointing people to this because we're not going to get across all the detail tonight. But you need to jump on the website and go to the Our Plan tab, and it'll show you where we think those jobs will be generated across the state. Now, I should have probably jumped into this a little sooner because I've already chewed up all my time, but I also did just want to flag our manufacturing plan as well, because generation is one side of things, but we've also proposed to get the state involved in actually generating the solar panels and the wind turbines that we need. Heard a lot from the PM recently, surprisingly enough. He's not the first person you'd expect to go down this road, but he's actually talking about our industrial sovereignty, you know, talking about getting some manufacturing going in Australia again. And this is an extraordinary way for us to create the jobs that we know we need. It's an integral part of a good COVID recovery, rather than this gas-led nonsense that we're hearing about. So we've proposed a solar panel factory in Townsville, a wind turbine factory near Rockhampton, just as, you know, effectively as publicly owned factories that can be the seeds for a burgeoning, a really an important and a growing renewables manufacturing industry in Queensland. And then
local content requirements of what, 60-odd%?
That's right. That's right. Which is obviously really, you know, that's an important part of making sure that as we're rolling out the renewables plan, that generation capacity, that not just the state-owned manufacturers, but also the rest of the manufacturing industry that we want to see come off the back of that can actually, you know, it's got a direct market here in Queensland. And the last thing I'll touch on, because I am rambling a bit, chewing up all the time for questions, but green steel. We know that we've got all the wherewithal here in Queensland to produce steel. Green steel technology is so exciting. They're still, you know, they're not at commercial scale yet, but this is why we've got such an amazing opportunity with all the raw materials, with the incredible renewables generation capacity to get these processes in train and start making steel with hydrogen rather than coal, so that we can make steel without the, you know, such catastrophic climate impacts as we know that the steel manufacturing industry.
Bam! Sounds like a plan. I think we need to get you in Parliament and give you a few mates and start actually delivering those excellent job-rich clean energy outcomes for the state. I'd vote for that. That was so lame. I know it's late. I'm no MC. Anyway, we're going to move to the myth-busting section now, Berko.
Okay.
And I don't know about you, but I do hear this an awful lot. And it's mostly because you hear it from the big parties a lot, and it's mostly because they get bought off by the coal, oil and gas companies. As we all know, those big fossil fuel industries donate squillions to Labor and the LNP. And what do you know? We don't have very strong climate policies. There might be a bit of a link there, which is why we need a federal corruption commission. But I digress. One of the main myths that you often hear spouted by the big parties or, you know, Joe Blow down the road is, what about baseload? Renewables can't do baseload. What, you know, how can we keep the lights on and you know, while we're wearing our hair shirts in caves? But what's your answer to the question about renewables can't do baseload power? And maybe you could just tell people what baseload power even is, because people might not know that's just 24/7 power.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Drunk Uncle Jeff. Baseload power. It's the simple idea that the grid needs to produce power all the time. And so, you know, the non-argument that's put up is that, what about when the sun doesn't shine and the wind's not blowing? You know, that's the classic. And sure, there's a grain of truth to that. And this is the problem with these myths. There's a grain of truth to the fact that, yes, renewables are somewhat more intermittent than if you're just burning coal all the time. But it's a myth. The myth of baseload is one that's really just been created by the fossil fuel sector to justify their existence, their ongoing existence, despite the fact that that coal is more expensive now. Coal generation is more expensive than renewables plus storage.
We'll come to that myth, buddy. Don't get ahead of yourself.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but no, it's because it's all so intertwined. Look, the way that we build a reliable power system is by having, the high volume of cheap solar generated and wind power that's distributed across the state. Because again, you might gripe about the wind not blowing, but if you've got enough generation capacity across the state, then you already start to flatten out that intermittency by having geographically dispersed generation. But the storage is really what this comes down to. So battery storage technologies are, they're improving all the time, and also pumped hydro. That's a really the potential of pumped hydro, I think, is really poorly recognised and a bit underrated. Now, there's studies done by ANU that have shown there are literally thousands of sites across the country, and heaps more in Queensland than we could possibly need for our storage, the storage state. And so, there you have it. That's the whole answer. And I think pumped hydro is one of those where we really could see the state make a much more direct investment in, in the investigations, the feasibility, and in the construction. As I've said before, it should be publicly owned infrastructure. And so this will, in the long run, because you don't have the ongoing input costs of the coal or the gas, this over time creates a much more reliable, but importantly, a much cheaper and more climate-friendly energy system.
Sounds good. All right. The next myth, which you started to touch on, is renewables is more expensive. Won't this just drive all of our bills up? What do you say to that one?
Well, Drunkle Jeff. No. So going back to our plan, the numbers that we've crunched show that our plan for the publicly owned renewable energy system, 100% targets, would actually cut power bills by an average of 46%. Now, there are a few different components to that. First of all is the fact, as I started to mention before, that solar and wind energy with storage are now, and this is something that, you've seen the ABC fact-checking, old Malcolm Turnbull's claims on it. It is cheaper to build renewables plus storage than it is to build any new coal-fired capacity, which is why any suggestion of a new coal-fired power station in Queensland is just absolutely absurd. And the ongoing cost of that, as I already mentioned, we've got no input costs. The sun is free, the wind is free, so they've got next to zero operating costs. So, and as well as that, one of the important parts of our plan is to look at the way even the publicly owned infrastructure we have here in Queensland, electricity infrastructure, it's kind of forced to run like a private company. So they pay all these competitive neutrality fees rather than just acting in the interests of Queenslanders. There's a whole bunch of complex market requirements that the state has chosen to buy into, which mean that we as electricity consumers are paying more for that than we need to, than the actual cost of it. So, so look, that's, I guess the short answer is yes, it's cheaper to make it now, and if we were to make some smarter decisions about the way the government has set up the grid and engaged with national energy markets, then it just would be cheaper.
Yep, here. So renewables are cheaper than new coal. And because of the massive amounts of privatisation in our electricity sector, we're all paying more for power than we should. So our solution to that is have a publicly provided electricity supplier that just gives you at cost electricity and doesn't try to make a profit off you. I think that's an excellent idea.
The best 20-second summary of a very long-winded answer I've heard in a long time.
No, we aim to please. All right, now the third myth, which is one that they always raise and it drives me crazy because it's just wrong. That's the technical term, is won't this mean less jobs for Queenslanders?
Yes, no, it won't mean less jobs. Again, this is all kind of jumbled up. Going back to the point I made earlier, the plan that we've proposed wouldn't just create on average those 23,000 jobs a year, but it also provides the basis for really thriving an energy-intensive manufacturing industry. Because when again, I think what springs to mind is, I think again, AEMO's suggestions that not only should we be aiming for 100% renewables, but if we're actually focused on, if we've got a real future focus on the industry of the future, and particularly on renewable energy export, we could be aiming for 700% renewable, which means we've got that hydrogen generation that we can be exporting, but we can also then afford to actually take on some of that really energy intensive manufacturing in Queensland, including like green steel that I mentioned before.
And so we could be a renewable energy superpower.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's been no secret that Australia, as a renewables generator, is positioned better than any country in the entire world. And we just, I guess that's the reason that we have continued to see, despite the best efforts of the fossil fuel lobby and, dinosaur governments all over the country, continued to see some incremental expansion of renewables, despite the best efforts to stymie it.
Yeah. So, that's right. That's right. It stands so well on its own 2 feet anyway, and there's been excellent support, thanks to the Greens in minority government 10 years ago federally, to set up the Renewable Energy Agency and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which have really assisted the development of renewables so beautifully that they are now cheaper and more job intensive and will fix a lot of stuff.
Right. And policies are just so damn good at what they do that they're Tory proof. Even Tony Abbott couldn't pull them apart, and no matter how hard he tried.
Well, that's because the Senate matters, folks. Balance of power should not be in one nation's hands, but that is a whole other Zoom. All right.
Look, a couple of other points I just wanted to jump on that. Sorry. It's really important for us to remember as well that a just transition does involve the creation of a whole bunch of jobs. Yes, changing from old fossil-based energy systems to the renewable systems of the future, it is going to require a shift. But there are jobs in mining rehabilitation that the state has completely missed. We haven't moved as far as we need to in terms of rehab requirements, but the same jobs, the same skills that are required to dig coal out of the ground, make big holes, are precisely those skills that you need to fill them back up, clean them up, and make sure that we don't have this legacy of environmental damage over generations. There are jobs in renewables, there are jobs in manufacturing, and I guess as well as that, it's important to remember that all of these essential service jobs that we need so many more of. We need more teachers. We need fully funded education. We need fully funded healthcare, and those essential service jobs are all green jobs. So if we just focus on getting the big mining companies, the big banks to actually pay a fair share to fully fund those essential services, there are jobs in those.
Absolutely. And if people in the mining industry did need to retrain, I hear that you say a lot of those skills are directly transferable and many people can just transition to a mining rehab job or building pipelines for green hydrogen rather than gas. But if there is some retraining required, should they have to pay for that retraining?
No, sorry. I think we've got some good policies on that maybe you could touch on just briefly, Larissa.
Free education. That's it in a nutshell. Right from childcare all the way through to tertiary and TAFE.
Yeah.
The end helps everybody, helps the economy, helps people, helps in the transition.
Yes, and it helps
great ideas tonight.
We are, yeah. It also helps me get over my aggro at the fact that so many of our elected representatives enjoyed a free education and have stripped that away in years past. So.
I think that's called do as I say, not as I do. And the Prime Minister is one of those cabinet ministers that got his uni for free. I know you and I had to pay for ours, and kids these days are paying through the absolute teeth for degrees where they're stacked into a classroom. The class sizes are huge. Half of it's online, and that's pre-COVID. Anyway, the quality of education sadly been reducing because federal governments have been underfunding and defunding our tertiary sectors. But again, that's a whole other topic. All right. So the next myth is that this transition is just going to cost too much. How can we possibly afford to do it?
Yeah, again, it's just so back to front. That argument completely ignores the incredible economic potential that comes with the transition to renewables. And so, yes, it does involve an upfront cost. There's no doubt about that. And our plan proposes debt-funded infrastructure, but the point is it's productive infrastructure. It actually, by building that generation capacity, we are making stuff that continues to produce energy over time. And at the moment, where we've got record low interest rates, we desperately need this kind of investment in major infrastructure projects for the COVID recovery. It is something of a no-brainer. Like, put those parallel problems side by side, and that's, we've got a solution for each. Now, as well as that, what we've proposed through Energy Queensland, we're suggesting that the return that they would get on this investment, they will be directed to only charge prices that ensure the initial investment's paid off, rather than making a profit, as we see from private generators or the private sector more broadly. Now, obviously, again, to make that initial investment, it's not all proposed to be debt funded. Again, we're saying that the big miners can pay a fair share. We're saying that the big banks can pay a bit more, and we've proposed all that. There's, again, go to the website and check out the mining royalties initiative that we've proposed. So through not just fossil fuels, but all the rest of our, we've got a really minerals rich state here, and we're an incredibly wealthy state. And those companies, those resource sector companies that have been making profit hand over fist for a couple of decades now, can afford to pay more.
Well, not only do many of them not pay tax because they've got, fancy accountants to exploit loopholes, but they had a royalty freeze given to them this year by our coal-friendly state government, didn't they? I think it was the same month that they froze public servants' wages. So, absolutely. Ordinary people have to tighten their belts, but if you're a big mining company who happens to donate to government or to the LNP, you don't have to pay any more royalties. It's fine. It's totally fine. So, yes, rectifying that and increasing those royalties and forcing companies to actually pay the tax that ordinary taxpayers have to pay would really fund an awful lot of great stuff, like free education, like good quality healthcare, and like a transition to 100% publicly owned renewables. Absolutely. So it sounds like a plan. The reason we don't have it is those big donations have bought off the two big parties, in my view.
And the one last, sorry, I got to jump in. The one last big point on cost is, how can we afford not to? The cost of not acting on climate change completely eclipses any of the cost of taking these steps now.
Yes, the human cost, the biodiversity cost, the economic cost, the costs on every vector. Yeah, cannot bear another summer like we just had from a emotional standpoint or from an infrastructure and financial standpoint. All right, so we're up to our last myth. You've done very well at busting these myths, Berko. You should go into politics, buddy. Major parties are supporting the expansion of gas. You would have heard our Prime Minister talk about gas-led recovery. And Angus Taylor, who's meant to be the Minister for Emissions Reductions, lol, because emissions have not reduced on his watch, certainly not from gas. In fact, they've gone up from gas. They want a gas-led recovery. Labor have now said they think gas is, they support environmentally sustainable gas. I'm back in the days where gas meant fracking, buggering up the water table, dispossessing First Nations people, and making the climate worse because it leaks through what's called fugitive emissions. But what do you say to this notion that we can use gas as a transition off coal?
Yeah, again, no, sorry. Very no. That's a very big no. And again,
I think that's more of a soz than a sorry.
Yeah. This is, again, just one of those myths that's being perpetuated by the industries that that serve to benefit from the the rampant expansion of gas in Queensland. And that, as you say, that's come at the expense of so many First Nations people, landholders who have just seen their land trampled all over. And some of the maps you see of just how invasive fracking is across Queensland. It's absolutely shocking. But again, I think you've almost made the point in the intro here, Larissa. It's all about the links between the donors and the governments that are making decisions. And I heard a quip recently that rang a little too true for me, from someone who has done a lot of work, a lot of investigative work looking at the gas industry in Queensland, a journalist. And he made the point that Queensland Labor is effectively a solely wholly owned subsidiary of Santos. And I don't think that's actually from the truth. It's pretty extraordinary just how close those links are between government and industry, and the very departments that are making decisions about approval of new projects. Really senior executives that are directly from these companies.
That's right. They go to work for the MPs, and then the MPs go to work for the companies. It's this cozy little revolving door.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. And
but they're regulating. They're really regulating.
Yeah.
They're regulating their post-parliamentary employment options. That's what they're regulating.
Yeah. So look, I don't know, the gas. It fascinates me a bit the way this gas transition myth took hold, because it was really very effectively rolled out. But we know that we have to transition away from gas every bit as much as we need to get away from coal. And particularly, as you mentioned, given that fugitive emissions are one of the, so that is the methane that's accidentally released in the mining, or the fracking, and the transportation of this gas.
Or the flaring, venting, the liquefaction. Yeah,
that's right. They just aren't accounted for in the process. And methane is a far more harmful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. So it's a major furphy, and something that, given the way Queensland just rushed through the approval of this massive statewide gas expansion about 10 years ago now, those risks to groundwater and the risk of fugitive emissions were just completely sidelined. They weren't even considered in the assessment process. So
they were, and it was all for export. So that meant our gas price got linked to the international market price, and so everybody's gas bills increased. Once again, corporate profits increasing and everybody else missing out and paying more, and our climate getting cooked, because gas is a fossil fuel that is virtually as dirty as coal. And it's no transition. It will displace renewables because its lifespan is too long. So we cannot afford to have a transition with gas. We need to just leapfrog straight to renewables, which we can do. As you've said, we've got the technology. Actually, we can create the jobs. We can then power manufacturing and build stuff again, whether that's building renewable energy components or green steel or just other stuff. Loving it. All right. Well, it's time now for me to talk.
Oh, that's the myth done, is it?
Yeah, so it's time now for me to do a very quick wrap of our federal energy and climate policy, which is very similar to the Queensland one, so I won't spend too much time on this. And then we're going to go to questions. So as you would know, because Berko's done such a wonderful job outlining our position, we want to transition to 100% renewables. We want to do that as quickly as we can by 2030 at the latest. And as we've already said, we know we've got the technology to do that, and we can generate jobs in doing so. We've got some fantastic options here in Australia. Our sun is unparalleled. Our wind is pretty good. We've got great options for pumped hydro, as Berko said, which is a really good storage option. We've got some geothermal potential, and we've got this great ability to capitalise on hydrogen export, which, if you generate hydrogen by splitting hydrogen from oxygen, obviously water, if you do that powered by renewables, you can create green hydrogen, which itself is a substitutable fuel for gas. And you can then liquefy it for export, or turn it into ammonia for export. You can do all of this great stuff, and the byproduct is just water vapor. So, these are the sorts of exports that we should be talking about as a nation that has been an energy exporter in the past of dirty energy. The writing's on the wall. The coal demand is dropping. It has not picked up. It is still on the decline. If we want to still continue to be an exporting nation, then exporting clean fuels like green hydrogen is a fantastic way to do it. And we will have that excess. We will be able to power all of our own domestic needs and still have leftover. So it's a pretty good plan. But to get there, you need targets, because investment is guided by targets, whether that's private investment or whether it's government investment, which we would like to see really driving this renewable transformation. We've got some pathetic targets from the current federal Liberal government. We've got a 2050 target from federal Labor, but there's no 2030 target or even a 2035 target from the big parties. So what's needed is a target now, because we actually don't have a lot of time to lose. We've just had what was referred to by climate experts as the critical decade. It just ended. We just lost that critical decade. We didn't do what we needed to do to arrest runaway climate change. So we've now got the really, really critical decade. I don't think they're calling it that, but that's what I'm calling it. And so we need a target for 2030 to essentially force everybody to focus on the need for rapid transformation. We can't just buy time. Gas isn't going to solve anything. The reef's not going to fix itself. It's not going to regrow in time. Like, stuff is urgent. It was urgent 10 years ago. It's even more urgent now. And I think people know that at a visceral level, because look at the summer we just had. We had the worst bushfires that we've ever had in this nation, or at least in recorded history. People died. Millions of animals were cooked. And much of our land was just devastated, not to mention the loss of our homes and other things that are precious to us. That's the future that we're heading towards if we don't make a change on how we power our cities and homes. And there's no downside to making that shift. We can still do all of the things that we want to do. We're just running it with clean energy. And the reason that we haven't done that yet is precisely because of the power of those fossil fuel sectors. They make those big political donations. It funds the re-election campaigns of the big parties. They then make job offers, or they go and be an advisor to those MPs. They get in their ear, and they've just got an enormous amount of influence. And it's unfair, because democracy is not meant to be able to be captured. It's not meant to be bought and sold. It's meant to be about the community, about science, about public interest, and about making decisions that help everyone and that help the planet, not just that increase corporate profits for the 1%. So this is why we drafted a very specky looking document, which is pre-COVID, so it won't have any references to COVID in it. Renew Australia, which is on our website, like all of our other fabulous plans, which runs through in detail the transition plan. And that free retraining and support for workers so that no one is left behind in the transition is one of the key components of that plan, because we can't have climate justice without social justice, and we need to bring all of the community with us as we tackle this just immensely large problem that as a society we've not had to tackle so big a problem before. So keeping hope is really important, and staying active in terms of political pressure is really important. And if I can just digress briefly to do a fangirl shout out, it has been so great to see people like Greta Thunberg, a young woman, neurodiverse woman at that, just blitz the global stage and talk about climate justice. There's other fabulous young women of colour that are doing the same right around the world. You've then got young politicians like AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In the US, there's young women that are really leading this climate movement. And that gives me heart as a mum of two young girls myself. But I digress onto my other favourite topic of gender equality. So we can fix the climate. We've got plans to transition to 100% renewables. It can create jobs. It can create whole new industries where we can start manufacturing things again. And we can reduce people's power bills, because if it's in government hands, then they can just make you pay the cost that it is to generate. They don't have to make a profit off you. And we can upgrade our network so that there's it's more reliable, and that it's ready and capable of delivering this dispatched renewables. So yeah, it's exciting stuff. All we're hearing from the big parties is gas or coal. But you know, the change is happening. So keep it up. Talk to the drunk uncle at Christmas. I'm going to go back to that old adage. And we can make this transition. That's it from me. Oh, I will mention one more thing. We talked about gas fracking and how bad it is for First Nations people, for farmland, for groundwater, for the climate. We've had a bill in the federal parliament to ban fracking since 2011. It's been voted down 5 times, but it's still there. I keep reintroducing it every time those other bastards vote it down, and it's still before the parliament, and we will keep fighting to protect people's land, their water, and all of our climate. So hopefully we'll get some company on that at some point in the future. So thanks. Yeah, let's move to the question part of the night. Hey,
overview. Yes. All right. I think we're going to start. So we did receive some questions ahead of time. So we'll answer a few of those, but please keep the questions coming. I think we can, through all the platforms we're streaming to, we can get questions in. So your name will pop up obviously, but maybe just include where you're from. It's always nice to have that kind of connection to place when we're answering a question. So I get to ask the first question here. So we've got the question from Will in Taringa for you, Larissa. And Will asks, Are there any options or strategies for using green hydrogen as an energy source? And is anything being done to ensure that it will be 100% green as opposed to fuels for its generation?
That's a great question, Will. We've talked a little bit about green hydrogen already this evening because it's kind of like the new frontier. And as I said before, it could really form the basis of a new export industry for Australia, which would be great because we can make money off a clean energy source and then invest it into schools and hospitals and all of the other good things that we all rely on and deserve. So we would like to see it 100% renewably made, and hence called green hydrogen. And the Liberal Party nationally are starting to talk about hydrogen, but they're not talking about green hydrogen. They're talking about what we call blue hydrogen, or hydrogen that's made from non-renewable energy sources, which is, kind of a bit weird. Why would you use fossil fuels to then make a non-fossil fuel? Just use non-fossil fuels to make more non-fossil fuels. Anyway, makes perfect sense to us. So long story short, we are the ones pushing for it to be 100% green, and vote for us, and we will work to deliver that through the parliament. I mentioned earlier, in the minority government 10 years ago, the Greens were able to set up and demand and push for an establishment of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is the funding body for renewables, one of them, and the Renewable Energy Agency, or ARENA as it's known, which is kind of like the R&D melting pot grants body. So you fund the idea, you then fund the commercialisation of it, and hey presto, you get great renewables. So that's the sort of thing that we can achieve when we're in a balance of power situation. That's what we pushed for and won 10 years ago. We then fought to keep that from the clutches of Tony Abbott, who wanted to abolish it, and through everything we had politically at negotiating with other parties to keep those two bodies on foot. We managed to do that. We lost the carbon price. Abbott, wanted to axe the tax. Remember that? When we were like, we're kind of back in slogan land, aren't we? But he was like the king of slogans. Yeah, we're back there again. We had slogan, waffle, slogan. Anyway, where was I saying? We managed to keep the CFC and ARENA, but we lost the carbon price. But this is why the Greens are crucial. This is why your Senate vote is crucial. This is why your Queensland Parliament vote is crucial. Michael's one voice at the minute. He's not in the balance of power, but the numbers are pretty close. And if we keep Michael's seat and we add Kirsten for McConnell and Amy for South Brisbane, Kirsten Lovejoy, Amy McMahon, there's a possibility that the Greens will be in the balance of power in the Queensland Parliament with a Labor government. And this is the perfect recipe for delivering on green hydrogen, for delivering on clean energy, for delivering on all of the things you've heard us talk about tonight. So, long story short, Will, I hope we've got your support in the upcoming election, because yes, we will push for green hydrogen.
Very good.
Okay, I've got a question for you, Berko.
Okay.
So Vinny has asked you, how can we do a better job communicating the difference between thermal coal and coal that's used for steel, which is metallurgical coal? And what is the Green stance on both of those different types of coal?
Excellent question, Vinny. And it's one that I think is kind of, it's been a bit of a difficult nut for the environment sector to crack for a while, because obviously getting the message out about how vital it is for us to move away from coal-fired power in Queensland has been really important. And in amongst that, that really hard messaging, that distinction has been lost a bit potentially. So we've got a bit of work to continue to educate people about the difference. It's important though as a starting point. So maybe I'll rewind a little bit as well. So Queensland exports a lot of coal. The vast majority of what we export is metallurgical coal though. It's about, I think it's about 80-20 at the moment, or maybe a one quarter, 3/4 split. But most of it's metallurgical coal used in steel production. In that context though, the Galilee Basin that the state is so hell-bent on opening up, the Adani mine, and where Gina Rinehart and Clive Palmer have got their projects, that is all thermal coal. And it is one of the biggest exclusively thermal coal basins in the entire world, or at least all of the coal that is proposed to be mined there. I think pretty much everything that's accessible is lower grade thermal coal. So it's quite extraordinary in that context that the state, while we're dealing with mostly met coal export at the moment, they're looking to move so drastically into thermal, particularly at this point in time. maybe the most important point to make as well, before I get to the distinction on our policy, is that we need to recognise that that both alternatives exist for both. Obviously, thermal coal, we've got the renewables alternatives that as we've discussed in some detail, can take their place. But green steel technologies have really come an awfully long way. And this is why we've proposed, as part of the manufacturing initiative we announced, that the state really needs to invest heavily in a green steel industry here. So that starts with a pilot plan. And what the difference here is that when, in steel production, I'm no industrial chemist, but in steel production, you take the iron ore, which has got a lot of oxygen in it, and you need to, so the coal, it's coking coal, goes into the process, and it basically, it reduces, it gets the oxygen out of the ore to give us that refined steel. Hydrogen can do the same thing, but in the way that Larissa was describing before, when you use hydrogen to do that, it's just hydrogen combining with the oxygen to refine the steel, which makes water. So we don't have the greenhouse gas emissions that come out of it. So super, super important for us to get those technologies humming along. There are pilot plants around the world. We need to use our natural advantage here in Australia and get on top of that as quickly as we can. So that $500 million investment we've proposed in a publicly owned and run green steel flagship factory in Gladstone is super important in getting that industry up and running here. So yeah, I think the distinction in our policy, we've got to put an end to all of it. We obviously need to focus on the energy sector because that's the lower hanging fruit. That's more immediately substitutable. But we also need to recognise that, for the transition, for all of these communities that are dependent on coal, we need to work on a transition that addresses all of those communities, all of the Bowen Basin coal producers, because the global markets are going to move away, and we need to provide alternatives, safe, secure jobs and futures for people across all of those sectors in time.
Absolutely, and plan for it, because it's going to happen. We might as well be ready and have a staged transition plan that the communities actually had a chance to have a say in. Spoiler alert: people should actually have a say in deciding their own future.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
Karen, we've got heaps of questions flooding in. Thank you, everyone. So you and I are being asked to be less politician-like and be more succinct.
All right, team.
We'll try.
Bust it out. Okay. Question for you, Larissa, from Rusty. Rusty asks, I'm curious if any thought has been put into micro hydro power generation as a baseload power source for residential and light industry, rather than reliance on chemical battery storage. Kinetic storage. Sorry, this is a lengthy question, but I'm gonna ask it all because it's a good one. Kinetic storage and new material technology are progressing at a rapid rate. Do you know what kind of funding is being put towards research councils in these areas? Could a state-based, publicly owned body work towards exploring more of the niche and nuanced energy mix solutions, especially in the context of city planning? Oh, there's a lot in there.
Dude, there's like 3 PhDs in that. I'll do my best in the short time that I've been asked to talk less, not talk more. So I'll do my best. Long story short, that's a really clever idea, and it uses the concept of kinetic energy. We've talked a bit about pumped hydro tonight, which is basically where you pump water up a hill using solar power while the sun's shining. You hold the water up the top, and then when you need that power later, when the sun's gone down, the water goes down the hill, or maybe it's not a hill, but it goes down a gradient and releases power that way. It's old school, but it works. So that's the concept of pumped hydro. And I think your suggestion of micro hydro is the similar concept. I confess, and this isn't my portfolio responsibilities federally, so I'm sure Adam knows all about this, but I confess I've actually never even heard of micro hydro. So I'm excited. Thank you, Rusty, for putting that on my radar. As I say, I'm sure Adam could give you a very learned answer. But I think the answer to your question about who could look at this and could a state body look at it, the answer is yes. That's why we want to extend out the powers of Energy Queensland. That's why we want to have a national body like we've called it Renew Australia, to do this sort of investigative work. That's why we need proper research and development funding and proper science funding in this country. And unfortunately, funding for R&D is at 30-year lows. And this government has never met a scientist that it doesn't want to silence or fire. So we've got a bit of work to do at funding the institutions that can then do this work. But I think that sounds like a really novel idea, and particularly the micro nature of it. makes it attractive for households but smaller communities. So I might leave it at that and maybe take the rest on notice, Rusty. Okay, I'm going to move to the next question because we're running out of time and there's such great questions. So Berko, one for you from Sunny, who's doing a consultancy program at UQ, investigating the viability of the Greens plan. Oh my God, we've hit the big time, buddy. Excellent. So we're being investigated into our viability of our plans. This is awesome. Sunny has asked in particular, what energy storage options are being considered to allow for 100% renewables? So basically storage is her question. What are the options for storage?
Yeah, for sure. And look, great question, Sunny. It's obviously an absolutely crucial component of any secure, stable energy system in the future. And so I'm actually, I'll just hark back to Rusty's question. There are obviously some really exciting and diverse technologies that are emerging around storage. So I think it's so important that we've got those, those bodies there to support emerging technologies as they arrive. Our plan specifically includes $1.5 billion for battery and pumped hydro storage over the next 4 years. So that includes both utility scale batteries and the household battery supports that I mentioned. And again, I already mentioned this earlier, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but we've got such incredible potential here for pumped hydro storage. So that ANU study, I think we're talking nearly 1,700 plus sites in Queensland alone that could be potential sites for pumped hydro. So the possibilities are there. And I sat in on a meeting with Larissa and heard a really, really interesting breakdown of one particular proposal that's, these proposals are getting close to being commercially viable without even any government support. And we can't afford to wait around though for the time it takes to get the funding for these off the ground. We need the government to start straight away.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull it up there unless you've got anything to add,
No,
Larissa.
I think that's good. Pumped hydro and batteries is essentially the storage options that we've got ready to go. Yeah.
That's right. All right, churning through the questions now. A question for you, Larissa, from Kimmy. Do we have a plan for the panels once they've reached their use-by date?
Oh, now the answer to that is yes, but we have very poor waste and recycling laws in this nation. And I mean, waste is like a whole issue that Peter Whish-Wilson, our senator from Tassie, does a great amount of work on. Like, we don't even have a proper national container deposit scheme, let alone solar panel manufacturing industry, but we could have that, and we should have laws that regulate that, because a lot of what's in the panels can be recycled, reused or recycled. It's about 80% glass, and then some of the metals and polymers can be reused as well. So long story short, we can, it's possible, and certainly we would like to push for that to happen.
Yeah, and I'm aware that there are some companies that are doing bits of this work around, some companies around the country that are doing bits of it, I think, but I don't know, I haven't heard of anyone in Queensland that's doing it. But yeah, companies are emerging, yeah.
All right, so there's a question from Kyle. I hope that's how we pronounce Kyle's name. I'm just wondering if the plan to build 20 gigawatts is what you plan to build until 2030 to reach 100, as in, does your 20 gigawatts get you to 100% renewables by 2030, or is that just a start?
Very good question, Kyle, an eye for detail. No, so the aim is to build an additional 20 gigawatts so those publicly owned renewables, the 20 gigawatts over the next 4 years while we're phasing out fossil fuels. And so the 100% target by 2030 goes well beyond that. The 4-year timeframe is essentially just because that's, the budgets are put together to deal with 4-year chunks. So the dorky forward estimates term is the one that a lot of the politicians like to use, but that's just how we can most sensibly frame it up in the context of the state budget.
Yes, and you'll be elected for another 4 years, so it's a 4-year term of government.
That's right.
Which we've only just moved to in Queensland.
Indeed.
All right, we've got 5 minutes to go, folks. We've got tons of questions here. Oh, they're all so good. How do we pick?
That's a very good question. All right, look, I'm just going to go. All right, so it's my turn to ask you, Larissa, a question from Craig. Question is, are the Greens going to support concentrated solar power, particularly molten salt solar power investment in Australia?
Yes, look, I love that idea, and people will know in Spain they did that, like, oh my God, it was like 8 years ago now. So we're losing our potential to lead in this field by being so friggin' slow. So long story short, it's another way of storing power. There was a feasibility study in South Australia done in 2013 from memory, which the Greens backed. So yes, we would like to see that as one of the options for storage that's investigated. We've got a few now. Burke has talked about the potential for the numbers of potential pumped hydro sites in Queensland, so that's attractive as well. There's batteries or there's solar thermal, so basically storing the energy you create as heat, and then you can release it at will. So yeah, this is exactly the sort of investigations we should be doing to power our cities, homes, and export industries.
And it ties back beautifully to the Drunkle question about baseload power earlier as well. Because this is one of those solar technologies that does provide that consistent power output even at night because of the stored heat. So
yes,
it's beautiful.
Yes,
beautiful
that's right. It works.
And the arrays look so pretty too.
Don't know what. I haven't gotten there yet, and none of us will, because the borders are rightly closed while we get this pandemic under control. But soon, people, soon. Okay, shall we have a last question? Here's a good one. A question from Dale, but it's not spelt the same way as your wife, Dale, so I don't think it's your wife giving you a Dorothy Dixer. Okay. Wouldn't the private sector solve our energy issues if there was a clear policy plan? That just disappeared as I was asking you, so I hope I've got Dale's question right. So basically, why won't the private sector just fix all this? Why do we need government intervention? Is, I think, the nub of the question.
Yeah, look, good. Good question. And I suppose maybe the way to start answering it is to say that if you're kind of right in that if we had stable policy settings and clear targets over the last decade, rather than this wasted decade that we've seen since. So back when we got that amazing, like literally world-leading emissions reduction legislation passed when Adam and Larissa were first elected, and when we had that.
Oh, yeah. I've still got the notice paper from that day. Sorry, I digress.
When Labor actually needed to work with us and negotiate legislation, if that scheme had stayed in place, God only knows where we'd be in terms of the renewables rollout and also our emissions reduction across the country. So yes, there's plenty of potential, and sure, private industry would have done plenty in the meantime. But the point that I keep coming back to, and I think is really important to remember, is that when we're talking about our energy systems, electricity is an essential service, and I don't have faith that the private sector, particularly given all the uncertainty and the federal policy settings at the moment, that they're going to get us there as quickly as we need to see the transition happen. But I also don't want to see the transition to renewables just become a process of privatisation by stealth. We're in a good position in Queensland in a lot of ways because we've got so much of our electricity infrastructure is still publicly owned, and there are stacks of problems with the way that it's owned, the way it's operated, and all the additional fees that we pay, particularly because of the privatisation of the retail part of the system. But short story long right there. But I guess what I'm saying is that essential services should be publicly owned. We should be able to get home, turn our light switch on, and have that powered by publicly owned renewable energy, and it's within reach. And that's what the Greens are pushing for, and what will be, what we're taking to this election, and what will be on the table if we find ourselves in a position where we've got any balance of power and some real leverage over whoever the future government might be.
Oh, we can all work for that outcome. So just to reprise, if you haven't yet volunteered to help on Michael's campaign, or Kirsten's if you're in McConnell, or Amy's if you're in South Brisbane, or Katinka Winston-Allen's if you're in Cooper, or Victor Hummel's if you're in Greenslopes, or any of our other fantastic Queensland candidates, which are going to be in all 93 seats across the whole of Queensland, then please lend your strength and your heart to our movement, because we can deliver wonderful outcomes. We've shown what can be done with Greens in Parliament. Michael's been just an absolute beacon of hope for the last 3 years in Queensland Parliament. We want to give him another 4 years to really make the changes that we know we need to improve the quality of all of our lives. So, yeah, get on board. I think, Berko, you're going to do a little wrap up for us now, and then we're going to say farewell and good night to everyone.
Your thing. Thanks, Larissa. Thanks for the props at the end. Yeah, it's a big time for us. There's a lot going on here in Queensland politics. There were also heaps of questions tonight. So I really appreciate all the engagement from everyone. And I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions. If we do this again, we will allow some more time to try and get through more of those rather than the Drunkle Q&A at the start. And if you had a really burning question that we didn't get to, please email it to me. We'll pop my my email address and Larissa's in the comments, and you can shoot them through to us. Look, all of the initiatives that we've discussed tonight for the Queensland Greens platform for this election are on the website. So we'll post a link to that in the comments as well. So please do keep in touch. As Larissa said, volunteer if you can. We're at a really pivotal point in Queensland's political history. This is going to be a fascinating election and an extraordinary opportunity for us to play a more important role. And remember that neither of the major parties are serious about climate or renewables and are really pushing them to the extent that we know we need to if we're going to maintain a safe future for our kids and their kids and for every generation to follow. So I think I'll leave it there. So thanks again. Thank you so much, Larissa. I really appreciate you taking the time out.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for all your expertise, Berko, and yeah, more strength to your arm, because as the only Queensland MP in the Parliament that does not take corporate donations, we need more people like you that haven't been bought and that will genuinely represent their constituents' best interest.
Thanks, Larissa. And thank you. Okay. All right.
Good night, everyone.
7:33. That's not bad for time. All right. Hope to see you all again soon.
Campaign trail. Bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
See you, Berko.